Andrew, thank you so much. Welcome to the M3 2020 Mobilizing Medical Missions Conference. My name is Chuck Pryor. I am with the co-founders of this M3 conference, and I thought that last question in Andrew's session was a great question, Dr. Paul.
Yeah.
By the way, Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. If one spouse is called to the mission and the other spouse doesn't feel that same calling, wow, that's, Andrew kind of didn't fully answer it. I thought, what a great way to start this little segment here. How would you advise and encourage somebody in a situation like that?
You know, I don't know if there's a right answer, but generally I think that unless you're in agreement, it's difficult to walk together.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think it almost always has to be, for it to be successful and to be long term, I think it's got to be a shared vision, shared dream, because there's a lot of ups and downs and a lot of tugs and pulls, and I think it's very important to be in unity there. Without being in unity, I think that it would be very difficult to stay long term.
Yeah, and I don't think God is going to ask us, Jennifer, don't you think, to be in that kind of a situation?
No, I don't think so. I think if Paul and I are both seeking God at the same time, at somewhat the same level, if he speaks to one of us about something, I think he'll confirm it with the other one. And he would want us to be on the same page. He would want us to be together. You know, that's kind of how we approached, even with our family. When we first felt like we were going to go, we sat our kids down and kind of told them, hey, this is what we feel like God's calling us to as a family. So it wasn't mom and dad are going to go on a trip.
Right. Walk us through that process and how that went. It was, 13 years ago, roughly?
It was, and what happened is part of the family went on our first missions trip, and then we just clearly felt that was the next step for us to take.
And was that an immediate feeling for you both, or?
I think so. Wouldn't you say? We had no disagreement. We both came back and said, let's take the next step. What we did is we went for 10 days to begin with. Felt like that there was confirmation, this is what we're supposed to do. Then we decided, well, we'll go for a month with the family. But the conversation we had with our children was that, listen, we're going to do this as a family. You guys are still little. You guys are still in grade school. Or
how old were they at the time?
How old were they?
Our youngest was probably 4, 3.
Okay, so they were still pretty young.
4 to 12, maybe.
Up to, around there. Yeah. But, one thing that I was thinking about when you said that is even now, I'm not able to always go with Paul. But we see it as a family effort.
Right.
So I'm here, I'm with our kids. They're mostly grown, but we still have one in high school. But we know if we can hold down the fort here, if we can pray and we can support Paul, we're still a part of what he's doing, even though we're not physically there with him.
It's still a we and an us.
It is.
Always.
Mission and project, regardless of who's in what location.
Yeah, and I think when I'm over there, and if something happens here that needs really my attention too, Jen has no guilt. She doesn't put any guilt on me. She just handles it, Chuck, just like as if I were there, because that's her. That's the burden she's bearing, to be able to let us go together as a family.
Yeah. Well, and you're better with her, and vice versa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
She's the better looking half of
absolutely.
Of the two.
Ultimately, it's not good to be apart for a long period of time. We know that, but we just know this is a season. And soon our kids will be out of the house, and we'll have more time for us to spend over there togetger.
And your kids are still really involved. I see your daughter's been here helping us out, Olivia. She's awesome. And that's still the goal, right? Is to just do as much as you can together.
Well, I think taking them on the mission field helped them see the world as it made it small for them. It made them be mission-minded. So even right now, they're not on the mission field, but they see where they are as their mission field.
Right.
And they know that wherever they are, they can carry that with them. Can I back up a second, though?
Sure.
I wanted to tell you something. So when you were asking us how it came about, how many years before we even went on our first missions trip?
10 years at least.
10 years before we ever went on our first missions trip, Paul and I felt sort of called to missions. We wanted to take a trip. We weren't sure what that looked like. And we filled out some papers, and the timing just wasn't right. And so we put them aside, and we were confused by that. And then fast forward, and we knew we were supposed to go on that first trip. So sometimes it's just a timing thing.
Right.
Right.
Now, I know it wasn't always like going to Disney World, though, right? Because when the kids are younger, they're more moldable, right? And they kind of can feel adventurous.
Yeah.
But there were some challenges along the way too, I understand.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge probably we had was when Jackson got malaria. And, you know, for somebody that lives in Africa to get malaria, that's one thing. But for somebody who has no exposure to malaria, to get malaria is a big deal. So he was very sick for several days, and that's where your mind will play tricks on you to say, am I really called to this? What if something happens to my child? And anyway, it was very tense there for a few days.
Did your mom guilt set in a little bit?
Not initially. You know, I think for me, where we are, there's a lot of malaria, and babies die all the time from malaria. Children die all the time. So coming that face to face with my own child, I think it deepened my compassion. It made me understand that most of the time I don't have to worry about that.
Right.
And yet Jackson was so sick, and I realized that on the hills all around there in Kenya, mothers are losing children all the time to malaria. And they weren't at the hospital. We had a pediatrician there taking care of Jackson, even at a mission hospital. But there are moms that can't get their children there. And so I think it deepened my compassion. I was worried. I did have maybe a little, concern. And then when we got back, actually a lot of people asked us when we got back, like, you put your kids in danger. What did you do?
I can imagine that.
Yeah, but even as a family, we prayed for him while we were there. It really, I think, bonded us in a unique way. And we never thought twice about it, though. We went right back.
Yeah.
So.
I think, too, one of the things Jen mentioned is that, if you're thinking about taking your kids on a missions trip, I would encourage you to do so, because our kids spent a lot of months, probably years over there with us at 4 or 5 month increments. Jen would load up everything and she'd homeschool them, so we could go for easily 4 or 5 months at a time. But what it did, Chuck, is it changed their lens. And without us knowing it, being in the United States, we have a lens. And that lens is, comfort, it's plenty, and we're not worried about bombs. We're not worried really about the grocery store not having groceries. We're not worried about, fuel for our vehicle. We're not worried.
You don't have to carry water for 3
we don't.
miles.
And there's this safety net that we take for granted. And all of a sudden, you change your lens over there, and all of a sudden you realize you're more grateful for what you have here. You're more sympathetic and compassionate toward the people that don't have it. It just changes your worldview. And someone said something to me that was very profound. They said, I used to think when I traveled to the developing countries, low resource countries, I used to think that the world was a place of abundance with pockets of poverty. And now I realize the world is a place of poverty with pockets of abundance. And we just happen to be in this incredible pocket of abundance. But there's a world out there that doesn't live like we do.
It's a perspective changer.
Huge,
for sure.
huge.
Yeah, because, let's face it, if kids don't get Wi-Fi today, they get all stressed out.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that's not a problem.
Right.
We think it's a perceived problem, right? Yeah, I love that. So fast forward, here we are, 13 years later. Kids are growing up, most out of college. Why continue M3? Why together, the mission that you both feel called to do?
Oh, I'm more passionate about it than ever. Again, as we've said before, I just want people to know about the opportunities that are out there. Statistics can numb you and paralyze you in inactivity, but statistics are just really one person, one mother, one father, one child. And you think you see millions of people that don't have this or don't have that, but you can make a difference with your life. And these organizations here that are exhibitors, these people that are giving their lives away, they're making a huge difference in this world. And it's all too not for self-gratification or make ourselves feel good about ourselves. We are the hands and feet of Jesus. And Matthew 25 still rings clear in my mind. He cares about people that are naked and hungry and thirsty and in prison and sick. And he wants the church. As a matter of fact, he divided, Chuck, if you look at that, he divided the sheep and the goats from how you treated those people. And so I think it's very important to realize you don't have to go to Africa to treat people like that. There are people on the streets of Houston or in your hometown. But you know what? God cares about people that are marginalized and poor, and we have to have that same heart.